All right, couple of Black Friday announcements since this is coming out the Wednesday before. If you go over to the merch store for the podcast, there should be a good sale going on there, so check that out. If you go to bigtruthpodcast.com/store, or if you go to bigtruthpodcast.com and hit the store link, it'll link you to the merch company, and there should be a good sale going on. So stock up on some podcast merch, hoodies, T-shirts. You can get a flag, crazy stuff. There's all, travel mugs, good stuff that makes gifts for people. So check it out over there. And at Chop Ahead, I am going to put all our oil tanks that are made in-house and some of our merchandise, some of our swag on a Black Friday sale. Haven't done one in a long time, so time to do that. So if you go over to chopahead.com, or if you come in the store, we're open on Friday. If you come in the shop, we're here. You will save some stuff there. So utilize both of those and give rad gifts this year, or stock up on stuff for yourself, right? If you want to support the show, check out patreon.com/bigtruth. And you can find more info there on all the levels of patronage, and they all have their own little benefits, like early access to episodes, bonus content, giveaways, stuff. Patreon.com/bigtruth. I'm just rolling off the top of my head here, trying to get these in. But for real, if you don't want to support the show financially, I get it. But this content is free. At least do me a solid and share the episodes with people, and give it a like and subscribe wherever you listen. And also, leave a review. That helps us get boosted in the algorithms. And if you leave a good or a funny review, I will read it, especially if you give a nice 5-star one on Apple, on the Apple Podcast app. Now, if you're in a situation where you need to get some artwork, you need to check out tattooflashcollective.com. And they have all kinds of art prints that would make awesome gifts. So check them out. I'm sure they're probably doing something for Black Friday. I haven't talked to Johannes. I should have done that beforehand. But even if not, if you use the promo code BigTruth at checkout, you get 10% off your order. So check it out. And they have Tattoo Flash, they have posters, they have books, all kinds of stuff. tattooflashcollective.com. On today's episode, we do show a couple things that are photos and stuff. So if you haven't seen it on YouTube, check, if you're listening, you might want to go back and check YouTube. I think it's just YouTube at the Big Truth Podcast. So do that. I don't know. I'm just trying to hammer through this, right? Give me a break. I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. It was Packer, who you know from the M4, and my brother K.O.'s birthdays last night. I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. Not even good sleep. So without further ado, we're going to get into it today. My man, Don Capria. Check it out.
Sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
All right. Once again, we have liftoff. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Big Truth Podcast, and I'm stoked to be spending a sunny Sunday morning with my man Don Capria here. He is like a lot of my friends that I'm stoked to say, is a multi-talented individual. He's been an artist management, a filmmaker, an author, all kinds of things. And so I'm stoked to get into it today. Don, how you doing, buddy?
I'm chilling, man. Thank you for having me on the show.
Man, it's a big year for you, bro. Like fucking, I know we're going to talk today a lot today about your book, but you just had a film like with an actual like theatrical release. Is it your first time with a major theatrical release?
Yeah, it's my first theatrical release, but also my first feature film. I've only before this done short films, TV pilots, and stuff. So this was my first big swing.
Did you ever do music videos too?
Yeah. I shot all the Scarhead videos you see. That's me. Maximum Penalty. Shout out to those guys. I shot a lot of hip hop stuff too. But that's kind of my first venture into filmmaking. Was when I was in artist management. I stepped foot on a music video set. And when I saw the action, we were in New York City, and it was like the street was shut down and all the lights were going, and there was like, there was cops on set, like making sure everything was cool. I was blown away.
Yeah,
And I was like, this is what I want to do. So I started off writing treatments for music videos, working in the AD capacity, assistant director.
Yeah.
And then I eventually graduated to directing music videos.
Okay. So it wasn't like when you were like younger, you weren't like, you didn't want to get into film. You weren't thinking about filmmaking. You were doing music stuff and artist management. And then when you saw the production, like a real production of like, of a behind the scenes making a video, you're like, oh shit, this is what I want to get involved in.
Yeah, there was like probably like a ghost on set with like a needle in my arm, like just injecting this idea into me, because I was like I was so blown away by it that I was like, I have to do this.
It's wild when that happens, right? Because you think you're on one trajectory, and then you get into something, and you're like, oh shit, like this is what I want to do. Like, and that's how it was even with this podcast, because like Ian McFarland, from McFarland, he does films and the old band Blood for Blood, he was always like, you got to do a podcast. And I'm like, why, man? I don't want to do that. And then I did one, and I was like, oh shit, this is fucking rad. I want to do this, And it was the same thing. I was like, and it, it's just evolved from there. And it started doing mostly punk rock and hardcore and motorcycle stuff. Then we do weird stuff. And now I'm just branching out. I'm just whatever's interesting, you know what I mean? But yeah, I know we're going to give everyone a little teaser here, but you just finished you said your first feature film, which is in the horror genre. And I know you got a little bit of punk rock in there, which is called Director's Cut. Why don't we give a little teaser about that? And, because I know it's, like you said, we're going to have you back on in a few months to push it, but let's wet people's whistles, man, and tell them a little bit about the movie, get people excited, because I've seen it like already, like people like in the horror community, like in like the content creators, people are already going fucking bananas about it. Like, you know what I mean? You're getting really good reviews. Rotten Tomatoes, like, I'm so proud of you, bro. Like, because Rotten Tomatoes is like fickle as fuck, right? And like you're doing like 70%, bro.
Out, man.
Yeah, 70%. Like fucking rad, man. It's so good.
I got crushed by a couple, and like, I feel like, and I managed EZAC for years.
Yeah.
And
so you can deal with anything. You can deal with anything.
But with him though, I was always like, I try to keep him offline. Like he gets some feedback on like YouTube or something. I'm like, dude, stop reading negative comments.
Yeah.
So now here I am years later reading critical reviews.
You're gonna take your own advice.
Yeah. Like, I want to jump on a plane and go to Canada and have a talk with this dude. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I know, dude.
He kind of came at me weird, but the overall response for the film has been good with the critics. And then the better part of that is that the popcorn meter, which is the audience score, has been through the roof good.
Through the roof,
so we're really blessed, man. It's cool to watch it happen.
Yeah, before we even talk about the movie, one thing that's like the burning question I have is like, this journey you've had starting with like videos and shorts and going into now you've done a feature film. Like as someone like, as a kid, I'm sure you went to movies and stuff. Like what was it like the first time going into like one of those like regular, like big fucking theaters and seeing your movie on like the big, like silver screen?
So the so much stuff surrounding what was going on was kind of created by me. So like the first time I saw it in the big screen atmosphere, I was at Company 3, which is a colorist company. Once we had the film picture locked and the sound was done, we went down there and we watched on the big screen. So still part of this whole process, right? Yeah. Then we did a private screening event to test it for people, which I set up. So it was still part of the process. Yeah. And then we did, our big premiere was a few days before the film came out in theaters. And also I'm part of that whole setup and that process. I have a team of people working it. It didn't really slap me in the face, and it actually hit me in a weird way until Halloween night, which was the release night. I just went out with a bunch of friends to a local theater here in Westchester, New York. And we're walking up. And as I'm walking up to the theater, my poster is hanging next to all these posters. Yeah. And I'm like, I was surprised by it because I didn't put that poster there. Everything else I was part of setting it up, but I didn't put that poster there. And that fucked me up a little bit. I was like, oh shit, it's really real, man. Like this is really something happened here. Yeah.
And what was it like sitting in a theater, just like as a patron watching your movie with like, a bunch of people that like paid to go see your movie? That's going to be wild.
It's cool. There's a curse that comes with that. It's really awesome because I think Chicago Horror Fest was really cool. So I drove out with my girl to Chicago about 2 weeks before the movie came out. We were in their horror festival, and we played in a theater, packed theater, and there's all these strangers in the theater watching your movie. So there was this like row of girls in the row in front of me and her, and they're watching the movie, and there's some comic relief with my one character, Juan, and these chicks are just cracking up at all the jokes, and they're really digging stuff. So that is really it's really awesome to like see strangers reacting to something that you wrote, in a little room somewhere. And it's pretty awesome. But then the curse that comes with that is like, there was like 2 or 3 times where I'm in a theater and I'm like, oh man, the sound seems like a little low. And then just recently, one of the screenings, we saw that like something had happened to the theater's white balance or whatever. So I can't stop being technical and like getting up out of my seat. And then I feel the way I felt when I was in artist management, when you're like, you got your band on and everyone needs to hear them a specific way, but like the sound guy's not doing something right. So you can't enjoy it. You have to go fix the problem,
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like, it's your baby, it's your creation. Like, and you know how it's supposed to look and sound. And when it's not optimal, you're like, come on, man. Like, like this ain't right. Like, it's like being in a band and it's like the sound ain't right. It's like, come on, dude. Like, but it's stuff beyond your control, But I mean, it's got to be some kind of validation though, like sitting there and like, yo, this is my thing. And it's like really happening. Yeah. It's not just, and I get like, the difference. There's got to be a little bit difference between like going to like a film fest that's like a horror film fest, because those are people that are there because they're super horror fans, right? No one just walks into a horror fest unless they're like a horror fan. But a regular theater, it's like Friday night, it's like, oh, let's go in there. What do you want to see? Oh, look at that. Like, this is regular ass people that might not be like super horror people, like walk in and you're watching them, you're in there with them, like, damn, dude, it's fucking wild,
Yeah, we did like 2 weeks after the movie came out, we did the horror and tattoo festival here in Westchester County at the county center.
Yeah.
So I'm downstairs and I've got like a display table and shirts and stuff. And people came up to the table like, I saw that movie last week. Yeah. And that was really cool because it's just some strangers, and it's like I didn't tell them to go see it or whatever. And like it's a cool interaction to see, total strangers that are going out and seeing and liking your movie. That's the awesome part about it, is that they tell you like a little piece of the movie, or most people have a certain question, which we'll get to at the next time we do this. We'll go over the movie, but they have a very specific question about a very specific character in the film.
Sure.
But it's cool to get these questions because it just shows their level of interest. And like you said, there is a moment, and I really try to humble myself and stop with the business and enjoy that moment, because the truth is you only get that moment once in a lifetime, right? You gotta relish in it. And sometimes my thinking brain and my management brain is working too hard to stop and enjoy those little moments.
And that was going to be actually my next question. Was there ever a point, like when you're watching it in one of the theaters, where you could get rid of like the creative control almost and just enjoy it as like a fan of movies, or like you know what I mean, and just get absorbed in the movie and the story itself?
At Deer Park, Long Island. So the movie came out on Halloween. So the next night we went to Deer Park, Long Island. And because we had so many people at the theater, a bunch of the brothers and everybody came out, they put us in the bigger theater. And it was such a good theater. It was Deer Park. It was Regal in Deer Park. It was so big. It was so loud that I allowed myself, I was just like, all right, I'm just going to watch this one right now. Yeah. And to hear the sound mixed at that level and to see it like that big, I definitely was like watching that movie again, like a fan of my own work. I'm not going to be one of those guys who's like, oh, I can't watch my own stuff. Like I had to watch this film like 1,000 times before it came out. Yeah. So probably more, but I could still, there's you've seen it enough, but there's still a way to enjoy it. And I think on the big screen like that with the powerful sound, it allowed me to be a viewer.
Yeah, just escape into it. Yeah. So did you want to show a trailer to get people excited? Actually, before we do that, like how many theaters did it come out in? Like as the initial the initial like release, because I know was it limited just East Coast, or was it? I know it was in Rhode Island and Mass and New York and stuff.
It went further than we thought. So we at first got a deal with Regal, and they were giving us 50 screens. And to be honest, it wasn't easy. It was a non-studio picture, again, studio pictures and also independent studio pictures, because we didn't even have an independent studio built. My studio is like a production company. So sure. Raising the money for the marketing was difficult, and going up against all these films that have millions of dollars to market their film was difficult. For those that don't know, like you get charged for everything on the theater side. Like they'll charge you to trailer, they'll charge you to put up the posters and stuff in the lobby. They'll charge you if you get an email from Regal or an email from AMC, those companies are paying those companies to send those emails. So there's a price tag on every form of promotion that you have to get out there. That's why the influencers, like you were talking about in the horror community, that stuff's so great because when they spread that word, people repost and talk about your film. So we ended up starting off with like a few theaters, and then like last minute, they just added, I think because of Joker had a little bit of, they got pulled from a lot of theaters. It had a lot of negative reactions, and that had come out a few weeks before us. So they started adding us, and we were in like 100 and something theaters. I think we were up to like 107 theaters, and that was nationwide. Like, I don't know how we got it, but they put us in like Anchorage, Alaska.
Nice.
So we couldn't promote there. Like we couldn't last minute send the poster out and like do the marketing. So we only marketed to around like 20 theaters, which for us was good because I think we did like 50,000 at the box office in 2 weeks, which for 20 something theaters and marketing, that's a good average. But for a lot of the theaters, we just didn't have we didn't have our rollout time to get there and promote properly. But I was blessed that we made it into, Spring, Texas, and like, all the outskirts of Minneapolis. Like there was all these different places that still had people see the movie pop up and go to the movie and watch it. So, I'm working on number 2, so we'll have to get back there again,
Yeah, absolutely, man. And now you've kind of like I don't know, like you've cracked the code, like you got in, like, and now you have something to fall back and be like, yeah, this is the follow up to this, which had this release 100 and whatever theaters, blah blah blah, and you can even do it bigger next time. Like, I know you're in works now for like distribution and stuff, so we'll really come in and hammer the movie then because it doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter now, but it's like if we do it now, like people will forget in 3 months. So we'll really talk about the movie in that process. But do you want to show the
Yeah,
you want to show
I got it here.
The trailer. All right, and if you're listening, if you're on YouTube, you'll see this. I don't get a strike against this or anything, right? Like, is it going to be like a copyright thing? No,
not at all.
No,
nope.
Right.
If they hit you up, just let me up.
Yeah. Hey, this is the guy that made the movie. He's letting us run it. Yeah, he's showing. But yeah, so if you're listening, go check out YouTube later because I'm the same way. I listen to podcasts and it's always weird to me when someone's playing or showing footage or something. But we got it on YouTube. You can watch it there. All right, let me know when you're ready, and I'll add this.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay,
I'm ready to press play. You tell me when.
Yeah, we're going, bud. We're going.
All right, here we go.
Oh, I'm not hearing sound. Oh, there we go.
You're not hearing sound?
No.
All right, we'll skip it.
All right. You know what? Just go to YouTube and type in director's cut trailer, and you will see it there. You'll see it there.
Yeah.
All right. But we got a glimpse. You might have recognized one of those guys. You know what I mean? If you're a fan of certain HBO shows that center on organized crime. And speaking of organized crime, this is a way we can start talking about your book. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your book? I know it made some waves and got a lot of good critical attention. So let's dive into that a little bit because everyone's always interested in true crime stuff and especially like mob related stories and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's what got me involved in the project was like I was just a young kid that grew up in New York in the suburbs and like was surrounded by this empire of crime, 30 minutes away from me. And, it even bleeds into the suburban neighborhood. So we had guys in my I'm Italian American. So we had guys in my neighborhood that looked and acted a certain way. And, that guy did numbers, a kid that worked in a card room for these guys. And I was just super interested in the mob genre as a whole and reading newspaper articles growing up about Gotti and the Persico Arena War and all this stuff that was happening. And I ended up, becoming an aficionado. Like my bookshelf is just filled with a couple of rows of true crime books, especially organized crime specifically.
Yeah.
I was with a friend of mine talking to him about Joe Colombo and how I was super interested in his story because it only had been written about in a few paragraphs in all these books. And it seemed to be like the same paragraphs regurgitated.
Yeah. Like they just cut and paste it type of thing.
Yeah. They changed a couple of like the adverbs and the descriptions and stuff, but it was the same exact story. So the guy was like, well, you can't really do nothing on him because his sons are all alive and you would need a blessing from the family and whatnot. So I was like, all right, put it to bed, and I was working on another project, and I got a phone call like 2 years later, and that guy was like, "Hey, man, I got someone that wants to talk to you about Joe Colombo." And I was like, okay. He's like, yeah, listen, he's working with the family on a project. So I was screenwriting at the time. I thought they were talking about doing a movie project, which I was like blown away. I get on the phone with this guy, Ray. It was like late at night. I remember I was working an edit, and he just calls me from a private number, and he starts asking me a couple of questions about myself and, what did I know about Joe Colombo? And he's like, listen, we're working on a project. He goes, I'm working with his oldest son, Anthony. Why don't you come meet us and we'll have a discussion? I said, sure. So I got in my car. I was living in Astoria at the time. I drove to upstate New York. On the side of the road, we hit this diner on a Sunday morning right about this time. Yeah. And we sat down at a giant round table. It was Anthony Colombo. It was his son, Anthony Jr. It was this guy, Ray, and this kid, Todd, who was driving. And we just sat down and we just had this big discussion about Joe Colombo. And they asked me a lot of questions, and I knew a lot of stuff that was outside of these books, specifically the existence of the FBI's COINTELPRO operation, which was a counterintelligence program that I believed, and many people believed, could have been behind the Colombo assassination plot. So when I started talking about that and the Italian American Civil Rights League, I think Anthony, the father, I think he was really interested in what I had known, and they wanted to hire me to write the book. So I send in, they had an agent at the time, Mickey Freiberg. He passed away, who did a lot of great books. He did like Goodfellas, all the Bonanno books. I think he did the Henry Hill book. Yeah, that was the Henry Hill book, but he did another one too, maybe Casino as well. And he also worked with the book that became Donnie Brasco, which was the special agent Joe Pistone. So the agent said, look, man, you're a nice guy and that's all great and you know a lot. He goes, but can you write? So send me in a chapter. So on spec, I just wrote a chapter and I send it into the agent and they read it and they're like, yeah, he's the guy. And boom, I was writing my first book on mob icon Joe Colombo.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like, never read a book before, right? Like, what's like the biggest? What's the biggest? I mean, obviously, like you've probably written treatments and like and things like that. But what's like the biggest thing that you'd like written? You know what I mean? Like that wasn't like involved like film oriented.
Yeah, film was the only stuff I had written in long form, which usually it's like 90 pages, maybe 100 and something pages long, and it's way less on the description side when you're writing for scripts, screenplays, as opposed to writing a book. So I did, not in a major way, but I did write a chapter of a book before I ever wrote a script. Okay. I was working on a story, and it was something that I ended up making a screenplay later. But I started writing the story, and I'm like, man, this is like, it's too big to be a book. Maybe it's going to be a series of books, and maybe it should be a television series. So it was kind of autobiographical. So I had written this whole chapter on this character that was based on me. So I had started writing descriptive stuff, and then I was like, scratch this. I'm going to get into filmmaking. So let me write a screenplay so that I can make it, as opposed to try to get a book deal. So I had written stuff before, but never to, I mean, this was such an undertaking. It was like, it was just one of those things where, like, I think it's Kurt Vonnegut says, you have to like jump off a cliff and learn to develop your wings on the way down.
Yeah. You just gotta trial by fire, right? But the problem is with this stuff, like, you're dealing with some serious dudes, like, so it's like you gotta come correct. You know what I mean?
That relationship, there's a lot of people were like, there was like, two things people would ask me, and they're like, well, one, were you nervous about working with the Colombos, being that Anthony Colombo himself was in the Colombo crime family? And then the second question was, you're writing a book that kind of says the FBI was responsible for killing this guy. Yeah. Are you nervous about any repercussions from that side of it too? And I was more nervous about the FBI than I was Anthony Colombo, because Anthony Colombo turned out to be the best creative working relationship that I've ever had in my life. He was so, just so like easy to get along with and so supportive of the creative process, that you would think he had worked with artists his whole life. He just, I was late turning in the book by a few months, and he never really came at me in an awkward way. He would just say, look, if you need more time, then we tell them you need more time. Get it done right was always what he said. Yeah. And, allowing me the creative freedoms to do stuff with this book, which was co-authored by him. He just always told me, like, look, if you want to interview someone that's going to say my father, did X, Y, or Z, and you believe they're telling the truth, and we'll put that in the book. He goes, what I don't want is like all these other books that have no validation to any of the things that they're saying, mainly all these books written by snitches that just come out with a million stories that are never validated. He's like, I don't want to be that book. I want to be a book that's supported by evidence, that's supported by witness or testimony. So, he was really, really supportive during the creative process. The FBI,
which is cool,
not so
because and I want to cut you off, but which is cool because that's like, there's a show of character there. Like, hey, you know what? You can say some negative things, but let's make sure it's like legit. Like, because no one's perfect, right? Like everyone's got two sides, or whatever. There's a scale to everybody, but to be able, because I was gonna wonder, that was one of the questions I'm sure. I was like, what was it like if you had to bring up some stuff that might have been a little, like, hey man, we're hearing this, like, what do you want to do with that? Like, because it sounds like he was more interested in putting out something that was like an actual reflection, good and bad, not just, not romanticizing something, but also just not shit talking something.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started, it was like, Anthony, you coming from that. If I wrote a book about your father, I would just completely do whatever I wanted to do and say whatever I wanted to say. I said, but this level of respect that I'm going to have, because this book is from the family, right? We get to tell intimate stories that no one would ever know. We get to see photographs that no one would have ever seen.
Yeah, it's a different level of access for sure.
Yeah, completely. Even the people that I interviewed that I got access to, like, Barry Slotnick, who was the league's attorney and Joe Colombo's attorney at the late 1960s and the 1970s before he was shot. That guy's, there's no author out there that's calling him up to do an interview. Like, it's not happening. He's just not picking up the phone, and he's still alive and he's still an attorney today, but you're not getting access to him. But because of Anthony, he did the interview with us for the book. So we got him involved, and we got a lot of good insight from him. But that was the kind of access I was given. And then, the flip side to that coin was, being able to tell certain things. I had to hit him with some hard questions. And I said, we have to make sure that we balance this book and it doesn't become a quote unquote whitewash about your dad, which I've seen a lot of people do also. They don't get into the dirt. And I think we did a good job with that by, showing the father-son story, which is kind of it's a true crime book in some respects. But there's also like a memoir side of this book as well, where any father-son is reading this and getting all of Anthony's perspective. And I think they'll respect the book just on that level, because it wasn't really easy growing up with a father like that. But then some moments were like glorious, So it was a really good combination of that in the book.
Yeah. And what were you going to say about the FBI's perspective on this? Like you had started to go down that path? Because that's going to be like you said, the worrisome one, right? Because they can probably cause you a little more problems, like like in the legal world,
You start off from Jump Street, and like you're telling a book, and you're working with the mobster's son. So they're not giving you any access. They're not, here's the list of agents that he worked with and their contact information. No, they're sending you you have this there's the thing called the Freedom of Information Act, where you have the ability to request any files that the government makes in law enforcement. That's at the state and the federal level. So you have the ability to do that, right? They send you what's called redacted paperwork, which means they cross out everything, lines that can never be read. So I would get like the FOIA on Joe Colombo, the FOIA on Joey Gallo, the FOIA on Carl Gambino. I got FOIAs on like 10 different individuals that were involved with him at that time. And the amount of redaction in these paperwork is insane. And remember, this is a story that was 40 years old at the time that I was writing it. So like the people that they're redacting to protect, they're not even alive anymore. So what are you talking about with this? And the level of access that they restrict you from, for me, I'm like, well, I'm gonna weaponize this then, because you would show me this if you didn't have involvement. You're only redacting to protect yourself and this potential conspiracy, because that's the truth. If you lay it down and you blueprint it all, you're looking at what kind of foundation they're setting. Well, they're making sure the foundation's built strong so that you can never have a case against them.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Like, they're not redacting things to protect people that were part of those organizations. They're protecting themselves, right? Because like you said, especially like at this point, most of the people, if not all, everyone's, there's not many people still alive that are involved in any of that. Like, same thing that's going on right now. Like, they still haven't released JFK, right? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Like,
who are they protecting? You know what I mean? And why?
You're only protecting potential government corruption, right?
Exactly, right.
Like at this level, that's it. And like the CIA there's even been people that have retired and like they're close to death, and they'll say, they're like, well, yeah, they're protecting the CIA, right? So it's like, all right, so we have to really realize that the CIA was involved somehow in some way with JFK's assassination, because, you would put at any point with the government, you would put a criminal on blast, whether that criminal was working for the government or working for the other or government, the Italian American organized crime. You're there to protect people from the criminals. Well, if you're the criminals, you have to out them at some point. And yeah, they're doing a good job of still to this day redacting information and protecting people that were criminals that worked for the government.
Yeah, it's wild because oh man, I forgot where I was going. It was due to, so full disclosure, it was a long night. It was KO and Packer's birthday that we went out for last night. So you can imagine,
amazing
how cloudy my head is. Functioning.
Only wish I was there with you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But yeah, man, that's so wild. It's so wild to think that you're writing a book about organized crime and you have like full access on part of everyone involved in like the organized crime aspect, and the government is the only one not cooperating because, well, who's got something to really hide at that point? You know what I mean? Especially like, right? Like no one, they're not trying to, it's not like there's still an ongoing investigation, right? Like everything's closed because these people are gone or dead or in jail or gone. Like, so like, so what you get so out of like 4 pages, what do you get, like a paragraph or two, and it's just like nonsense?
Yeah, you get a couple of little things here and there. The NYPD side, they had made a little bit, I guess, what we would call an error. There were things that were in the FOIA with the NYPD, and even in the ballistics report. So if those that don't know, Joe Colombo was shot in Columbus Circle at a rally in 1971 in front of like 20,000 people. It was a few hours before the second Italian Unity Day rally began, and there was a gunman in the press circle, which you needed credentials to get into this area. And he came in and he had a gun, shot Joe Colombo in the back of the head 3 times. And then he was handcuffed by police, shot in the back while in police custody, very similar to the JFK style assassination where the shooter gets killed to be silenced.
Yeah.
And the investigation remained unsolved.
Also, the attempted one on Trump not too long ago. It's convenient how the patsy is always kind of whacked before they can talk, right? Like,
exactly, yeah. So, you got a sniper. They could have definitely wounded that guy or shot the weapon. That's another thing, but we can get into that later.
We don't go into there's too many rabbit holes right now. Yeah.
I love
one common thread though. One common thread though to all these rabbit holes, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're always talking about something that could have the government involvement too. There was a popular story behind the Joe Colombo shooting that kind of made it to the papers, and it became John Q. Public's narrative for the shooting was that Joe Gallo had come home from jail and he was working with blacks in jail. And that's how Jerome Johnson was hired. And then Jerome Johnson shoots him and he dies. And then Gallo gets killed a year later on Mulberry Street. Kind of case closed, right? This gangster tried to have this gangster killed, then this gangster gets killed. Gangster. The problem with that was that, this plan to shoot Joe Colombo had started while Gallo was in prison, and he didn't have access and from the people that I've interviewed, he also wasn't as intelligent as this plan was. Joe Gallo, he was known as Joey the Blonde in the street. People called him Crazy Joe Gallo, but that nickname was never made public back then to him. He was nicknamed Ubats by some of the older gangsters, which was the word for crazy. But no one ever called it to his face, out of respect for him, and also that he was a very fierce dude. So they would never say that to him. But he wasn't. He was fierce, but he wasn't super smart. It was actually his older brother, Larry Gallo, who was the brains of that Gallo organization down there on President Street in Brooklyn. So this wasn't the type of plan, a well thought out, many moving parts that Joe Gallo would have been the mastermind of. And this is coming from people that I interviewed that knew him and worked with him. And then, the other part of that whole thing was that there were actual things and events that needed to take place. There was purchases made. There was getting the press credentials. There was a camera that was rented weeks before the rally had happened. There was all these different things that like he would have need to have been setting up, right when he came home from jail, and having, access to people in Boston, access to people within the league in New Jersey where the press pass was grabbed from. And there was just too many moving parts that I was investigating that it was almost impossible for Joe Gallo to be that person. But that was still publicized in the media back then. The media was making sure that story was on the front page, and that was what everyone was bringing forth. And they never made an arrest in the shooting. And then, the chief of detective at the time, his name was Albert Seidman, that had the largest police presence in the history of the NYPD at that rally that day. Alongside that New York City Police Department presence was the FBI and believed to be CIA people in that crowd. Now, beyond that, there was also the most amount of television cameras at a rally for this particular thing, because they had cameras in from Italy, because there was the Italian TV covering it, European TV, all the local news networks. And there was footage and cameras, still photographers. And the rumor was that day the FBI was walking around and grabbing all the footage from him, grabbing cameras out of people's hands. And when the NYPD went to look for some of this footage, they heard men in suits grabbed it. And the FBI claims, well, we never investigated this because we don't have jurisdiction. This was an NYPD shooting. We left it in the hands of NYPD. Well, why'd you go around and grab all the footage and all the cameras and all of everything? There was a lot of stuff. And I outline in the end of the book, after chapter 13, it's really just an outline of all the different conspiracy theories, which are just theories of how Joe Colombo was shot. Was it a lone gunman theory? Was this guy just a deranged lunatic who wanted to kill Joe Colombo? Was it an assassination attempt via Joey Gallo with the blessing of the five families, Carl Gambino being the head of that at the time, which I could argue that that's not even true? Was it a FBI CIA conspiracy where the government was kind of tired of Joe Colombo and his power at that time and needed to take him out? I mean, that one made the most sense because, with that bullet, you kill a bunch of things. Not only do you start a mob war in the streets by blaming Joe Gallo, pinning people against each other in the mob factions, you kill and you create a panic for, again, civil rights leaders, right? Because that's what Joe really was powerful for in New York City, was being the leader of the Italian American Civil Rights League. And then when you kill that voice, people don't want to get behind that. And the league actually at that point was almost completely demolished after the shooting. So, by pinning it on Gallo and shooting the leader of the Italian American Civil Rights League, the people that benefited the most from that would have been the U.S. government.
Yeah. And, it has all the markings of any kind of operation like that. Like, think about, like you just laid out, the level of access and planning someone would have to get all those pieces in order is pretty remarkable, right? Or it's just the biggest string of coincidences ever that where just things fall in dumb luck, right? You know what I mean? How much dumb luck can there be that the guy would have that much access to be there, have the pass, be able to get a weapon through, blah, blah, blah. And then you said,
stop you right there on the weapon real quick. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I didn't want to miss this point. This is a good one where there were evidence to support. So Albert Seidman was on television numerous times talking about the case and that they were close to making an arrest and whatnot. He was questioned, and it's on tape, about the weapon. And he said there is no known traceable evidence to this weapon. It's, so it's its first appearance here that we found that day, because they recovered the weapon that shot Johnson and the weapon that shot Colombo. So they identified the weapon that shot Joe Colombo as this German Menta automatic weapon, a very small pistol, and it had no history. So it was kind of this new weapon that was introduced. The NYPD, and here's the mistake that I was mentioning before, they sent me the ballistics report, and the weapon that shot Joe Colombo had history. It was actually a weapon that was retrieved in an arrest in the late 1950s, and it sat in NYPD confiscation evidence chamber and went missing in the late 1960s from an NYPD evidence chamber, and then shows up again at the Joe Colombo shooting. So what he said I don't know if he had never thought that the ballistics report would become public, but I got the ballistics report in 2011. So what he said was directly against the ballistics report that was released to the public. So that was just a piece of evidence where it's like, man, this doesn't smell right on the government side, you know, where they're saying one thing, but the facts don't add up to what they're telling the news media.
Yeah. And isn't that always a smokescreen to like weaponize the media to put out, you know, the propaganda that you need to have out there? You know what I mean? That's still like, I don't know. I think the way we grew up, we kind of have a little more critical thought about things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like we look at that naturally. Like any news story I see on any major news outlet, left or right, like I'm like, what's the slant here? You know, or like what's the purpose behind this? Or like why are they pushing this narrative so hard? And you know, and there's so much evidence now of collaboration between these, you know, 3-letter agencies and the media to put out these narratives. So, and it's still happening to this day, like with election stuff and whatever. And it's like, you know, I'm not I'm not on any political side because I'm an independent person, but you know, it's just wild to see it always at play. The same things are always at play. Like, you know, these wacky big, you know, situations that like no normal person could just have that level of access, the media component to it, and you know the whole spin. And then like you said, you try and get the Freedom of Information Act stuff on it, and everything that's of importance is redacted for the most part. Like you said, like you have to be top notch. So what were some of the more you know, you just laid out a lot of, you know, real interesting, but like working on this book, what were some of the biggest surprises or like the most, you know, interesting or like, you know, notable experiences for you in doing this investigation? Like, you know, I'm sure it was a pretty encompassing part of, you know, for that portion of your life. Like how long did it take you to get the whole book together? And, you know, you know, what were some of the more interesting things that you uncovered, or you know, or situations you found yourself in? Because I'm sure it got wacky sometimes, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was wild. You feel like you're doing like this cold case kind of a situation where I felt like an investigator that tries to you know, uncover the source of this murder, this assassination attempt, and I'm working with the guy's son, right, and the grandson. So you know, I've got this crazy board behind me, and I got all this evidence pinned up on the board, and I'm like,
you get the lines connect and everything, like that board.
I definitely had thumbtacks with threads.
Yeah.
Articles, and you know, I'm putting all these pieces together in my mad little mind, and then you got to figure out a way to like write that so people can ingest it easily.
Yeah, or even just figuring out how to organize it before you even start writing it. Like you probably did like heavy outlining, probably, right? Like just
heavy and rearranging. I think, you know, one of the greatest gifts we have as writers is to be able to rewrite and rearrange, because you know, nothing should ever be permanent. You should never say, well, this is how it has to be. You know, you want to always, it's continuously growing. You know, the stories are growing, you're getting new evidence, so you have to be able to really maneuver all of that and change. And it took me about 3.5 years from start to finish to research and write the book. But there was a lot of stuff. I mean, like, you know, as I was digging deep into COINTELPRO, which was the FBI organization that J. Edgar Hoover started, and it was a counterintelligence program that, like, if you explained this to people, they would almost dismiss it as like, nah, that's not true. But the fact is that there's paperwork on this. And so what it was he started this counterintelligence program, which was a program designed where they would put fake news, fake information out to people to create a situation that they could capitalize on. I'll give you for instance. There was an operation done by COINTELPRO in the 1960s where they were sending organized crime guys, used to hang out in social clubs and whatnot. So they would send them letters to these social clubs saying that, you know, the Big Truth Social Club on New Utrecht Avenue would get this letter, and they'd open it up and say, listen, we wanted to inform you from the FBI that this communist organization is planning to bomb your social club, right? So they would send them like this memorandum. And what they knew would happen was that, well, the Big Truth Social Club now has an enemy. It's the commies, right? So they would let you know some of the key figures that were involved, but they could not make an arrest because they didn't have enough information. And they would do this. They would pin mobsters against one another. They would tell a mobster, like, look, we want to tell you this, you know, that, truth, we're sorry, but this guy, Jackie Shmomo, he's going to try to kill you.
Yeah,
so what are you doing now? Well, now you're prepared for a war.
Yeah. Or you're going to take care of the situation before it takes care of you, and they're just waiting to see how it all plays out. Or get you to do something. Left. Yeah, or get you to do something so they can get you on that. It's like almost entrapment. You know what I mean?
So this was kind of the game that they were playing, and the when I researched this, I started digging deeper, and there was a guy that was he was. I'm trying to think of who it was. I think it was Deloach. It was the CIA director, Cartha Deloach, and this was in the 1950s. He started a program in the CIA before Hoover, and Hoover actually looked at his model and said, I'm going to adopt this model and use it here in the U.S. So Deloach started this program internationally. What he was doing was they would get operatives inside media, and they would promote stories through news media in different countries to start getting people to pin against one another so they could create these little wars in other countries. And when Hoover saw that, he didn't think, that's fucking disgusting. He was like, that's brilliant. Yeah. Let me do that here in the United States with the FBI. And what they were after, the FBI obviously was always after the communists. They were after any kind of political dissident group. So, and we all know that the FBI was responsible for the shooting of Fred Hampton, the Black Panther in Chicago. So they were using it against the Panthers, Weather Underground, the Italian-American gangs, so the organized crime factions in the United States, then the Italian-American Civil Rights League. And this program, it only became public because in 1971, and I believe there's a documentary about it, COINTELPRO was outed finally because there was these college students in Pennsylvania that knew there were FBI agents coming to all these different anti-war rallies. And they wanted to put an end to it. So like, how we're going to put an end to it? We know where their field office is. We're going to break into the field office, and we're going to get the identities of all these operatives, and we're going to put them out on blast. So these kids broke into an FBI field office, and they just stole all this paperwork. And when they uncovered what the paperwork was, they found the COINTELPRO files. So they found these files that the FBI was promoting fake and false news stories. And all they found was this many. They got into a small field office. It wasn't like they found, the big safe or it was just, one cash register, not the bank. Yeah. And when that all happened, it was within a year, Hoover retired. All of these other people retired, and not until a Senate committee hearing in 1978 did they actually start talking about how the government was doing illegal operations against its own people. And when that Senate hearing happened, and I outlined some of this in the book, 6 of the 8 people that were reporting to go speak upon this were dead within a 7-month period before they went to the hearings. One of the guys was shot while jogging by a hunter in the woods who mistakenly thought he was a deer. I mean, you can't make this stuff. So when I started having moments, I'm researching all these dead guys. And I'm researching the story of how this hunter shot him at 6 o'clock in the morning because he thought he was a deer. And that guy didn't even go to jail. And his father it was just the rabbit hole was just I was like, whoa. Whoa. This is not real. No, wait. It's fucking real. It's real. Yeah. It's real.
Yeah, you could just write a follow-up book on that operation, man. You know what I mean? And I know there's been stuff written about COINTEL and everything, but it's just
there's I probably got it laying on my shelf, but there's just a book called COINTELPRO, and it's a small book, but it's a very informative book. But I mean I've read everything from the conspiracy theories of society, cover up, legacy of secrecy. I was trying to see if that COINTELPRO book was on my shelf. It usually is, but I think it's just called COINTELPRO, and it's just a really good book. But if you do look it up, the documentary is called 1971, I believe. But here we go, truth. So this is COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret war on political freedom.
Yeah, dude. There's the sad thing to say is even though that specific program has been outed, it seems like there's there's always 2 or 3 more to replace it because I don't know.
Yeah, do we really think that they outed that program and they canceled publicly the program in 1971 and they were just like, we're never going to do that again?
Yeah. so much wild stuff going on that, like I don't know. Any critical thinker can see that there's definitely some tomfoolery still going on today.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, anything, what else, man? Tell anything, other stories, good stories from the book, like whether it's stuff you uncovered or any especially standout interviews or experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing, that like had that kind of like Hollywood glossy part of the whole Colombo story involved Hollywood, which was that, if those that didn't know, Joe Colombo was directly involved in the making of The Godfather.
Yeah.
And that wasn't because he was involved, while the story was being brought to the table. It was a situation, again, with the Italian-American Civil Rights League in 1970, where like they found out that the book, The Godfather, which was an international bestseller, was going to be made into a movie. And there were people that came from Hollywood to scout Mulberry and scout New York so they could have this, because that's where the setting for The Godfather was, right? And Joe Colombo wanted to make sure that, well, if Hollywood's going to come and there's going to be these, Jewish producers that are going to make this movie about Italian Americans, well, they're going to work with the Italian American community, and we're going to make sure of that. So there was a lot of roadblocks and things that were preventing them from getting full access to the community. And with that, they had to kind of bend the knee to Joe Colombo and the Italian American Civil Rights League. Now, there are stories out there that they were threatened by the league. And, I'm not saying that there were never any threats made, but a lot of the stuff that I've heard is just completely untrue. And it was just made to kind of like, glamorize mob and how this movie was made, with the mob and also, against the mob. But the truth was they had to work with the Italian American community because Joe had such control over things like the union truck drivers and the catering, the actors union, the musicians. There's all these different unions that he had access to that were just like, we're going to fold our arms and we're not moving forward till you make a deal with these people. So you had two main characters that were making the movie, The Godfather. One was Bob Evans, who ran Paramount Studios, and the other was Al Ruddy, who was the independent producer making the film with Francis Ford Coppola. And both these guys didn't want to talk to Colombo, but Al Ruddy had some nuts. He came from a construction background, real kind of a tough guy to be a producer in Hollywood. And he met with Joe Colombo. He gave Joe Colombo a copy of the script. Joe Colombo quickly agrees, like, look, we're going to help you make this movie. Let's take the words Mafia and La Cosa Nostra, which we find defamatory, out of the script. And, the public story on that one even goes that Joe just kind of like brushed through the script and was like, yeah, just take out Mafia and La Cosa Nostra and you can make the movie. The deal wasn't made that fast and so indifferent. It was actually Joe's major plot was, well, if I can get Paramount to say that they agree to work with the Italian American Civil Rights League in making a movie, then my Italian American Civil Rights League just stopped Hollywood. We now we're going to publicize that. And they did. The next day they had a press junket and Ruddy ends up getting fired from Paramount for making the movie. And then they're like, look, we're just going to make this movie back on a lot in Hollywood. And then Francis Ford Coppola was like, you're just going to make the movie on a lot in Hollywood. I'm not making this movie unless it happens in New York. So there was all this standstill that happened. And it was really Joe Colombo who helped negotiate a lot of stuff to make sure the movie moved forward with everyone involved from jump that they wanted, Coppola and the locations that they wanted in New York City. So he had a very heavy hand in helping that movie happen. They made a television series recently on Paramount Plus called The Offer, which outlines the making of The Godfather. And Giovanni Ribisi plays Joe Colombo. And I had sent him the book, and he used that book in all of his interviews. He talked about me in the book, how it was inspiration for him. He definitely didn't play Joe the way I would have coached him to play Joe. I actually offered him video footage of Joe speaking so he could see that it was even more of a Brooklyn accent. But I think he treated Joe in a very kind of doted gangster way, very like he was just like thuggish, where Joe was very charismatic. He was a very calculated speaker, even though he had a heavy Brooklyn accent. Everything that was coming out of his head was very well thought out. And I think there was a missed opportunity there, but they wanted to really go with the mobster fantasy stuff. And, they had incidents that happened. One, for instance, was the home in Staten Island that was used for the wedding scene that the Godfather starts off at, this really awesome home. The guy had told them he would work with them and then told them he wouldn't. And Colombo went and had dinner with this guy, and they made a deal with him where they were going to help him with his son's college something. And it was just, that's what happened. They didn't tie him up in a basement and tell him, you're using this house or you're getting killed or whatever. You know, that's
going to make you an
just,
offer you can't refuse. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, the truth is that I interviewed Al Ruddy, who his story is the offer. And none of the things that he said on the gangster side were mentioned in the interview. He knew they weren't true. He wasn't going to start telling me things that didn't happen that I had evidence to. So when he made that book, or that he made that television series, it was self-preservation. You know, it was a little bit of fantasy and Hollywood stuff mixed in with his story. And kudos to him, because the series is awesome. If you watch it, it's highly entertaining. It's a really, really great series on the making of The Godfather. Because we all know kids don't read books anymore, right? So they're not going to. Mine is in chapter 10. It's all dedicated to The Godfather. But a buddy of mine wrote, Mark Seal wrote the book called Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, which is a full text on the making of The Godfather, which is an amazing read and has all these amazing small stories about how the film got made and a lot of the mob involvement too.
Yeah, dude, I totally forgot that was on my list. You know, like you get so caught up in stuff. Like, I've been meaning to watch that, and now that you said it was decent, I'll definitely go back and make sure I put that in the queue tonight. Was there anything particularly like hard that you uncovered that was like hard to bring to Anthony? Like, you know what I mean? Like, was there anything that you were like, dude, like we got to have a talk about this? Like, that made it in the book. I'm sure, you know, you don't want to talk about anything that didn't make it, but was there any situations where you're like
definitely. I think there was, you know, we wanted to talk a lot about the father. So he was very he was very strict in how he wanted this book represented from his perspective. And that was that he said, look, I want to tell you the story of my father as I knew him from the time I was born till the day he was shot. And he goes, and the fact is, while I suspected him a few times in my life of being involved in organized crime, I never believed it up until that moment. Because when I did approach him or when stuff did happen, he completely denied it. And he was my father. There's no bigger hero in my world than my father was to me. He goes, so, you know, and he said, look, years later, and only a few months after the shooting, I realized who my father was because people then told me. He goes, but I want to tell this story from the time I was born until the time the shooting happened, because that's the perspective that I want the world to see, because that's all I knew at that time. So I want them to try to see my father in that light. So while I thought that was a great idea, I said, well, then we have to pick some stories and some things that help shape your relationship with your father, where he isn't always this hero. And for that, we had to dig into, you know, arguments and things that weren't, you know, pretty, so to speak. And then when you have those things, right, if you have 7 of them or whatever, you can only pick a few of them because your story has to be balanced, right? You have to have these ups and these downs. It has to create some kind of a rhythm as you're going through.
And it has to contribute to the story itself and not just be filler, you know, or something extra.
Yeah. So you know, I think, you know, one of them was, you know, potentially showing some form of personal racial energy, let's say, where there was a scene where Anthony and his brother, this new shotgun came in, and the father had bought it. It was like a Browning shotgun. And he's like, they had a house in upstate New York that they would always travel to on the weekends and the summers. So when these kids were, you know, maybe 11 and 12, you know, they were really ready to go and shoot this new weapon that the dad got, and he took them. So he takes them, they get their hunting gear on, and they just start walking through these fields in upstate New York. And he takes the weapon out, and they're out in the middle of nowhere. And he looks at the boys and he says, you know, why I brought you out here? And they're like, you know, to shoot the gun. He's like, well, I brought you out here to tell you a couple of things, and I brought this weapon with me. He goes, I want to tell you some things as men that you can and cannot do, being my children. And he says, you can never do drugs. Okay. I don't ever want to catch or find out that you're doing drugs. So stay far away from it. You can never become cops. He goes, no son of mine is ever going to work in law enforcement. And he said, you can never date outside of your race. I don't want you to ever come home with someone that's not an Italian. And he said, and if you do any of these three things, this is the weapon that I'm going to shoot you with. So you have no one to worry about but me.
Mm.
And, that story paints him in a specific way, right? But it's the reality. And it was something that I felt so moved by, when we wrote it out, because, his father was just a certain human being born at a certain time with certain views of how the world worked. And he thought that if those children did any of those three things, that they could be injured by outside sources. So he was going to be very firm and discipline them in the way he thought was best for their survival,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like he did a lot of protecting them, like shielding them from, the criminal elements of things. But then also, like you said, that's another way of shielding them from the criminal elements of things. Because as his kid, if they're doing any of that, that's going to be a reflection, and someone might come at it weird and sideways. And so he's like, yeah, before someone else does it, I'm going to do it. Right.
I'm going to take care of it. Yeah. And I love that story because it also shows like, his leadership and his discipline and punishment is going to come from him. It's not,
it's not going to be doled out. It's going to, he's not going to delegate it. He's going to handle it.
It's a piece of honor, alongside this kind of dirty story, and you have to respect that. Like, people, they say there's no honor among thieves. And I will argue that to the death, because I do believe that criminals have their own codes in which they operate. Yeah. And there is a hierarchy that how certain criminals are. I think it was me in doing a lot of Gotti research at the time, and just thinking about, the dismantling of organized crime in New York. And I said, well, you only have one byproduct of dismantling organized crime, and that is disorganized crime. And now look at our city. You have no hierarchy of criminals. You have no gang relations that work with one another and have any kind of communication. So you just have the NYPD chasing rabbits and chickens all day long, trying to make sure that the city is safe.
Yeah, it just gets wild style. Was there any plans to like, to turn this into a screenplay at any point, or was it? I know that had to come up in talks at some point.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I think documentary is one of them. I really think that this becomes like a mini series doc where we really get into a lot of things that he did with the Italian American Civil Rights League, a lot of the theories about who he was and his rise to power as a gangster and an organized crime member. Even some of the father-son stuff could make it in the doc too. But I do believe that there's a huge opportunity to tell one of the most amazing stories about a rise to power. You remember, this is a kid from the streets of Brooklyn who rose and became one of the heads of the 5 families, right? And his demise, was the beef with the FBI, the beef with the U.S. government, the beef with possibly other organized crime figures, and then the shooting in Columbus Circle. So it's such a tragedy at the end of all this, that I think it, for Hollywood, it makes such an amazing story. So I'm waiting for that one producer to read the book and say, hey, dude,
let's do this.
We got to go for this. Yeah.
Because like, as a creator, it's got to be freeing now. Like, what you just said actually makes the most sense. Like some kind of long form documentary series on this would be like perfect, because every aspect can be its own hour-long episode, and you could have like 12 hours of like, documentary on this, like, where it's not like trying to push everything into one, hour or 2 hour, documentary. I love that format. Like that's going to be like something, you know what I mean? Like it's so cool now, like the options we have for content, you know what I mean? Like, in lack of a better word, like the docu-series, even just like TV series now, it's so different than when we were kids. Remember, like you have 3 channels and, not dating us, you know what I mean? But, and then cable came out and then whatever. But have you...
The docs have gone like in a whole amazing direction.
Yeah, it's
like I watch a lot of these like these newer ones now that are really getting like they've taken, back in the day used to be like an actor in a doc and they replay certain scenes or whatnot, reenactment so to speak, and now it's like theatrical, right? Where they're like getting a real actor to do some really cool stuff, and they'll play out a scene, but then they'll give you the documentarian side of it and the narration and the factual evidence and whatnot.
Yeah, and even if you don't do the I mean, the reenactment stuff, just like a straight documentary. You could each chapter of that book could be its own documentary episode, like, you know what I mean? And like, and expand it on in ways that like, that allow you to go even more deeper and into the context of everything. Like you said, there's like 4 different stories right there that you just talked about. Right. And it's each one of those could be its own thing. So it's wild.
Yeah. And I think, you know, in true to podcast or / radio style, you know, when you have different people that are working on discussing this factual information, it becomes a discussion, right?
Yeah.
So with the discussion, you're open up to new ideas because, again, we're talking about the main source of my book is this unsolved murder, this shooting that has all these different pieces of evidence lying on the ground to investigate. And when you're investigating, you're communicating with one another. What are the possible, you know, outcomes of this whole thing?
Yeah. You know, even did you ever hear of a true crime, and it was based on like Hell's Angels, one particular Hell's Angel, unknown relative. It was a podcast, true crime podcast series. Like, because this could also be like a podcast series, like where it's a true crime podcast series, and you know, because I'm sure there's a lot of like, you know, did you record all the interviews and stuff? Like,
yeah,
so, yeah, you could take a lot of, you know, you could do something rad with that as well, like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something, you know, I cherish. We actually have, for those that want to check it out, there is a Colombo book YouTube channel, and if you share the screen, I could show people that.
Yeah.
That
Tell me when you're ready, and I'll throw it on there.
I'm ready to rock.
All right, here we go.
So if you go to this YouTube channel, it has the icon of the book, and it's a small YouTube channel with 16 videos. But on these videos, with the ones that I'm highlighting are these ones with Anthony Colombo that were filmed by Esteban Oriol. And they're these small little vignettes that he talks about some stuff that made it into the book and some stuff that didn't. We also have like the book available trailer and whatnot. But these videos are really cool videos so if you wanted to see and hear Anthony Colombo speak, I would recommend going to this channel, which is just at Colombo Book on YouTube.
Yeah, and Esteban Oriol is such an amazing photographer, man. Like his work is so, I don't know. Great.
He's amazing. I've been friends with Esteban for many years, and we got to work together in the music business. He's shot a lot of the artists that I rep, but also beyond the artists that I rep, he was the person that took the back cover photo for the Colombo book of Anthony. So we went back to Central Park to Columbus Circle, and Anthony had not been to Columbus Circle since his father's shooting in 1971. So it was 40 years later that we went with Esteban to take pictures for the back of the book. So the only book photos in the Colombo book that are not archive photos from the 1970s and below are the photo of the back cover that he took of Anthony, the press photo that he took of Anthony, and my press photo he also took.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to have him involved in that project because I'm a huge fan of his work.
Yeah, it's dope. Was that something that was you know, kind of a weird or emotional moment for him to go back to that? Did he not go there on purpose for all that 40 years? Like,
I would definitely say that would have been what it was. I didn't know until that moment. He said to me in one of our first interviews as a self-description of character, he said, look, you're going to meet a lot of people that know me or claim that they know me when you're doing these interviews. And he goes, and there's going to be people and they're going to probably say something to the effect of, you know, he's a dinosaur. And he goes, and when someone says that about me, if I'm not there, I want you to thank them from me because I am a dinosaur. I come from an era of things that don't exist anymore. And that's this manhood and this honor and this, and like he set the tone early with that. And I was really moved by that because I got exactly what he was trying to say to me. So it's not that he hid emotions, but he was not an emotional man, right? But you could tell that he was this loving father and loving husband. And the way that he treated people, you know, he says, you know, a quote from his father was, you know, respect every man you meet, from the bum on the street to the president of the United States. And you could tell he carried himself in that way. But he also carried himself in a way that you didn't see him withholding emotion, but he just wasn't really ever trying to show you that. He was the man's man, so to speak.
Yeah.
So when we were there that day, he just kind of leaned into me and just looked around at Columbus Circle, and he's like, I haven't been here since my father's shooting. And he was looking around at everything from the street, where there was possible blood spilled, to the buildings and how they changed. And I caught that moment with him for a minute, and it was sensational. It was like, I'm here with, sometimes I think I may forget who I was involved with because I'm so interested in the work.
Yeah.
But I'm like standing in Columbus Circle with the son of the man that was shot, who that guy's father was also murdered, and like the pedigree of this Colombo crime family. And, I kind of took it in for a second, like, yeah, this is big. And I'm having a big moment with him. And those photographs that day are, they're epic. And it was a really, really amazing moment. And I think for him, it was probably both traumatic and also cathartic. I know writing the book was cathartic for him, to be able to get out all these stories about his father that the world never knew.
Yeah. That must have made a kind of an interesting bond between you two, doing that book and writing that together, and like the whole cathartic nature of that.
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, he became such a close friend of mine that the book didn't come out for years. We had a problem with the publisher. So there was this whole waiting period where we were in like kind of an arbitration stage with the publisher and our lawyers and emails. And so I move on in life and I'm doing other things. And, I ended up shooting the short film called Eulogy. And, Anthony came to the premiere of that in New York City at Gold Bar. And he's sitting there, in this kind of Hollywood setting, walking with the cane, taking pictures with me and my friends. And, it was just a really amazing relationship. And I don't know if you knew, Big Chris and him actually got pretty close.
Yeah.
So, Chris was actually the person who phoned me. He found out that Anthony had passed before I did. And I'll never forget that call. And Chris, in so many different ways, grew a bond with him. And the cool story I remember was when, Chris took Anthony to go see Blink 182.
Yeah.
And, Travis had just dropped his book and Anthony had just dropped his book. So these two guys are exchanging books. And, Anthony says to him something to the effect of, I don't know how this book is going to be for you, but you're a pretty good drummer. This really cool story. You got this, this retired gangster, at this punk rock show. And Anthony was just that guy. Like he was very, very conservative in some respect, but very open-minded in many others.
Yeah.
And he was just such a respect-giving and human being that it was really hard. He was a very likable person, really amazing human being.
Awesome, man. Anything else why don't you, where, I know it's on Amazon, like where else can people find the book? Like, is there an audio version too?
We didn't make the audio yet, which I gotta get on top of that, because that's something that I know is it's needed, because so many people don't read nowadays, and I need to get on.
They listen to it while they're commuting and stuff,
Yeah. So I'm gonna get in touch with the Audible folks soon. And I think now that I finished the film and we set the distribution deal, I have a little bit more time to breathe and get back to getting some stuff organized with that. But the easiest way for people to find the book, we have a website. It's just colombobook.com. And that has everything from links to the social media pages, including that YouTube page we discussed, to links to buy the book from the publisher. But I think the easiest way to pick up the book is just so simple. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Colombo, The Unsolved Murder. And I have that link pulled up here. And you could just see, we're a 4.4 star rating. That's pretty good.
Yeah. And I'll have all the links in the show notes too. So if someone's driving right now, you can just check it later and you can click on it and get to everything.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and that's definitely the easiest way to check it out.
Yeah. Anything else before we wrap up, man? I know we're going a little bit over time. We're going to have you back so we can talk about director's cut in a couple months when all the distribution's worked out on that. But yeah, definitely thanks for coming on today. It was good just catching up, man. We haven't talked in a little bit, and this is probably the most we've talked in a long time, just one-on-one. But yeah, dude, fucking anything else you want to shout out or anything before we wrap up?
No, I mean, that's really it, is the book, my little social media. You got that link, Don Capria. And then, I'm looking forward to coming back and discussing some of this film in a couple of months. So
yeah, I can't wait to get into
holidays.
it. And again, dude, I'm so stoked for you, dude. Like the success of that movie, it's like it's like an honor for all of us. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, fuck yeah, my boy fucking in theaters is like wild. And at the same time, Slane's in theater with Joker too. You know what I mean? Fucking wild, dude. Yeah. It's like fucking crazy. Yeah. It's like,
it's definitely wild, man. Yeah. It's definitely it's humbling, and you feel real blessed to be, in these situations in life. The work, it's a lot, it is definitely a lot to chew, and a lot of digging, a lot of hand-to-hand combat goes involved in filmmaking, that people think it's just about the red carpet and, popping popcorn and bottles. But the amount of work that goes into this is just, you have to be relentless again and again.
It's just a tribute to your work ethic, man, because behind the scenes, anything that looks easy, there's fucking 10,000 hours behind that, right? That's why it looks easy, because it's like there's all the stuff that's been done to get it to that point.
Yep. And, so, like blessed to be in the theaters, and blessed to have, people like yourself also recognizing it and supporting, because that's what I love about us is, the support that we find within our community, especially the hardcore community, even the horror community also. Yeah. A big shout out to that community as well, because it seemed to be, a counterpart or a cousin to the hardcore and the punk scene as well, the way people treat one another.
Yeah. The horror scene is you got some rabid fans, like no pun intended. You know what I'm saying? Like they're wild, dude. They're fucking all in. Even when I was a kid, I remember like I went to like one of those Fangoria weekend of horror conventions, and I was like, man, this is fucking bananas. Like people are wild, dude. I just went to get some bootleg VHS movies. You know what I mean? Or like wild stuff. But people are crazy.
I think before there was cosplay, with people going to conventions, where there was Haunt, where like people went to horror conventions dressed up as horror creatures and whatnot, So, shout out to the originators who were really big fans,
I actually had a guy on the podcast who's an old friend of mine from when we were kids, like who I hadn't seen in a long time. And he's involved in that. Like he's involved in like doing haunted houses and all that stuff. And it was interesting to talk to him to get the behind the scenes of that stuff. Cause that's a whole other crazy industry. And they got conventions just for that stuff, like to get new technology for haunted houses and crazy stuff, man. Anything that you're into, there's like a weird world behind it. And it's awesome to find out about that stuff. It's fun. Man, thanks again for coming on. I'm gonna shut this recording off, but I'm not hanging up. Hold on one second here, and all your links will be on the show notes, and so look it up and go get that book, support it, and and if you don't read, just wait. We'll get the audio book out soon. All right, hold on.